How can we define mental health? How does this relate to mental illness and mental well-being?
Right. So mental health really refers to a state of mental well-being. And this includes your emotional, your psychological, your social, your relationships. And the two distinctive ways we define it is that you are feeling good and you are functioning well.
Feeling good, functioning well.
So if you're feeling good, you can ask yourself, well, how am I feeling today? Right? And then you can say, am I able to do the things I've always been able to do? And then the third part, I guess, is, am I able to cope with the stress or stresses that's in my life? And when we say cope, we mean healthy coping. Not like go through the workday and end up at night, like, drinking 10 glasses of alcohol just to sleep, and then you can't sleep. So that's not really functioning well. That's surviving.
I've seen patterns of this in my friend circle, actually.
Yes. Yeah, so we may think this is normal, but then it just means that you need support to actually get a good night, for example, or need support not to feel the anxiety or whatever it is you're feeling.
I like that. So good point. Healthy coping.
Yes, healthy coping.
Wow.
Yeah. And mental illness, of course, I guess is the, in a way, opposite of that there's some disturbance in your cognitive function, your emotions, and your relationships are not able to, gel together well, precisely because of change in behaviors that we can't understand, right? And then that leads to not being able to function normally, right? Yeah. So,
and what are some of these challenges that, people with mental health issues, what do they face?
I think there's a lot of stigma, and I mean, in light of Mental Health Awareness Day tomorrow, I think we need to talk about stigma, meaning that, there are many things that people assume mentally ill people are like, for example, they're just faking it. You're just trying to get attention, you're lazy, or you're weak, you have a personality defect, and that's why you can't just snap out of it. I'm sure you have heard all these before. Yeah, and all these are very unhealthy ways to look at a person who is really struggling.
Okay. It's not easy to identify. I mean, especially if you've spent a lot of time with this person, maybe growing up, it's someone in your family or your friend circle, and you don't, sometimes you just want them to, like you say, just snap out of it.
Yeah,
but
because
how does one do that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not easy to snap out of it in the first place. That's probably why it's a myth, and it does require quite a lot of things. For example, support from the people who love them, awareness that there is something that's not quite right at the moment, and a willingness to seek help. So help seeking is really an important part of resilience. If they are willing to say, like, okay, I'm okay to go and speak to somebody, a mental health professional who can support me in some way, whether it's therapy or, there's so many types, then that's already a good sign. But if they're not willing to seek help, then they're kind of just stuck in that space.
Yeah.
And no matter how much the family member tries to help, for example, if that person doesn't go, then it's just going to remain status quo.
There is still stigma about getting help.
Yes.
So I think hopefully with this, day tomorrow, we can remove all those different stigmas and, like you said, challenges that they face.
Can I ask you, what are some issues that individuals could be going through which are actually mental health related that perhaps they're unaware of?
Yeah, I mean, for example, if you have anxiety, then you may be experiencing anxiety. Okay, normal anxiety is such that when there's a pressing situation, you're under high pressure and you have to perform, then you have anxiety. That's okay, right? We've all been through high pressure situations. But if after the high pressure situation is over and you're still feeling the lingering effects and that persists despite not being in the stress zone, then I would say that may not be so normal, because, like, hey, where you haven't dealt with the...
It's a bit of a warning bell going off,
Yeah, correct, right? I mean, normally, a normal nervous system, which is the part that regulates our emotions, can calm down and self-soothe by itself. Yeah, so there's this thing called the window of tolerance where we can self-soothe.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if it goes beyond your window and you don't know how to bring it back, then you can imagine you're in this heightened state all the time.
Wow.
So, but you're right, Carol, because sometimes we can get used to it or think that heightened state becomes normal.
Yeah.
Because we have not seen or experienced anything else.
Because that becomes your new operating system.
That's
I'm just
right.
like this. This is how I deal with stuff. But
Yes.
actually, you do need a bit of an intervention, or you need some help.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, but if you try to do the opposite, because you're so conditioned, the body would send you alarm bells and say, no, this is not right.
Yeah.
Something's wrong. You're not safe, and then push you back into that situation. So it can be quite challenging to resolve.
Sure.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Is there any other issues that some of these individuals could be facing that they're unaware of? Would you count, I don't know, trauma, bullying, all these as part of?
I mean, I think trauma is a big one, but most people think that trauma is like big events that happen to you.
I do.
Yeah.
So it's not?
No. So if you know, there's a doctor called Dr. Gabor Mate, and he really is into trauma and healing work, and he's a Holocaust survivor. He was in the Holocaust as a baby, and his mother had to, abandon him for his
to
safety.
save his life, yeah.
And he defines trauma as how you feel in the moment when a situation happens, and it does not have to be a big event.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be something like abuse or war.
Okay.
But it could be something that happened in your household, and as a child, you felt extremely alone or helpless to respond to it. So that feeling in that moment is where the trauma seed is.
Or unsafe? Would you say unsafe?
Yes, unsafe or threatened, or you can't solve the problem, or you feel helpless. So that in itself is actually how he defines it.
Wow, just thinking by that new definition itself, then it could even be an everyday occurrence.
Yes, and if it's repeated every day, you can imagine over time, then it accumulates.
That is very enlightening, Sha, and I don't think I've heard it described that way before. Thank you so much for bringing that to us this morning. Hey, our chat continues on Facebook. We are live this morning at 1FM 91.3 as we speak to happiness scientist Yeo Sha-En on the topic of mental health.
And don't forget to chime on in with your questions, your comments on our Facebook page, because it might just win you this world-class dermafiller facial from Uniba, which is worth $299, made in Korea. They're all safe, effective, and results-driven.
Back with more Sha-En in just a bit. You always blow my mind every morning.
Definitely. So as we were sharing on air, that if you chime on in, share your comments, your questions right now on our Facebook page for our Facebook Live video, it might just win you this Derma Filler Facial from Uniba that's worth $299. You can find out more over at their website, uniba.co.
All right, so Sha-En, we were talking about, issues that individuals could be going through that they are not aware are actually mental health issues. So if these things persist, like you say, I like the description of mental wellness. Are you feeling good and are you functioning well? And there are so many things that are happening in this day and age because we have more awareness. This generation has a vocabulary to describe some of these issues that the previous generation, like the Gen Xers, like myself, we didn't have this vocabulary, this understanding around some of these trauma issues that actually can really adversely affect your mental health. So, things like gaslighting, we didn't have that word back in the day, but that can be something quite awful these days, especially with social media.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have a genuine, authentic experience internally with your emotions, for example, and you already feel like something's not right, but someone comes out and tell you that's fine, then your own self gets dismissed. Yeah. And that's why when we always say like be yourself, it's so hard to be yourself sometimes because we have been dismissed, or we betray ourselves in a certain extent by saying no lah, what you're experiencing not true lah, but actually you felt it. So then your body is confused. What do I do with that real feeling that I've had if you suppress it? Yeah, so suppression, lack of expression can all be signs that you may have been through something. And so even, sometimes we say speak up. Well, you cannot say. It's like you have no voice. Yeah.
What should we be saying to someone who's feeling that way?
I think just lots of empathy and compassion, and say like, it looks like, this is difficult for you to do. And you don't have to go and diagnose the person, but just something like that, or you can say that, well, I may not be able to relate, but I'm okay to listen. I just be present.
Recently came across, how like on the topic of empathy, you want to try and empathize with someone, but I also read somewhere that, if someone's telling you an issue, you shouldn't be responding by, I also had that happen to me. I also, encountered this. And then the focus becomes on you instead.
Yes, that's called taking over the conversation.
Yeah. So what should we be doing? It's like, I want to empathize, but it's like, then how do you...
If you think that you have a good story and a good solution, you could listen to the person first and say, hey, wow, sounds like that's really difficult for you. I thought of something that in my experience perhaps could help. Would that be something you'd like to listen to? Because then we're actually asking permission if the person is willing. Because we don't quite know sometimes whether the person actually wants a solution or just wants to be listened to. Very often they want to be listened to rather than like tell me what to do, right?
True. And okay, just as a side question, right? You mentioned before on air about how some people feel they're not taken seriously because, there's a stigma around it, right? People just dismiss it like, oh, you're lazy, it's not true, it's not genuine. But how do we, discern when it's really a case of there could be a possible issue versus those who are just, there are people who are using it as an excuse,
you hear vernacular like I'm depressed, right? And they'll say it, but then they don't look it.
So how do we discern? We want to be there, we want to show support, we want to offer help, but yet in other cases it feels nowadays that everyone is just putting their hands up saying that I'm suffering from it too.
I would say like just lean in with curiosity first and say, hey, what's going on? So the same physician, Dr. Gabor, he says, when people show up with certain presentations, many people would say, what's wrong with you? With the assumption that there's already something wrong. But instead, we should ask, what happened to you? What happened to you? Because if we think about trauma being something that may have happened, a situation that we felt helpless to respond to, then something happened. So he says, what happened to you?
Wow.
It's a very powerful question, but most people do not ask. We just say what happened, and people will relate, oh, this happened. But what happened to you? What was going on with you during that time? And sometimes that could prompt the person to speak if they are ready, of course.
Yeah. I like how that immediately kind of personalizes the question as opposed to what happened. It sounds a bit like, confronting in a way, but what happened to you is like there's immediately an interest in that person and their backstory and what's their current reality and state of affairs in their life. Whoa, that is, who is this guy? I need to meet this person. What's his name?
Dr. Gabor Mate.
Is he still alive?
Yes, he is.
Okay, wonderful,
Gabor Mate.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, I've not heard of him. In terms of like the Holocaust experience, there's always Viktor Frankl that we hear of.
And Edith Eger as well, also another Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
they're both amazing.
Goodness, thank you for sharing your resources and your wisdom. Definitely very
I've learned a lot from them, that's why.
Is that why you're so calm and so zen?
Well, most of the time. I can't say I'm like this 100% of the time.
It is our reality with you though. Our encounters with you have always been very calm. All right, heading back live on air. Join us there.
It's Secret by OMD, and no secret is what Sha-En is sharing with us today as we celebrate, of course, World Mental Health Day taking place tomorrow, and that is the focus for today's talk with Sha-En. I just want to put it out there that every Monday I look forward to all these sessions with Sha-En because I really do learn a lot.
We do.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, how do we actually define mental wellness? And you said, do we feel good, number one, and number two, are we functioning well? Those are two very important markers as to whether or not we have that sense of mental wellness and balance in our lives, right? Yeah. So at what point should someone take note that, an issue requires attention? For example, anxiety. Earlier on you mentioned that you could be anxious about an event, but after you go home, you're still feeling anxious. You can't seem to calm yourself down. Yeah.
We have to understand what is like our baseline of normal functioning. And most people will be able to sleep a decent amount of sleep, be able to go and run your errands, go to work and all that, right? Of course, there'll be ups and downs through the day. But if you notice that, hey, suddenly you're not able to like go and engage in exercise like you've always been used to, and you just have no motivation, for example, or no mood, or just everything feels very blah. And then when you go to work, you look at things and like things don't seem to work, and it's been going on for a while. Right. Then I would say at least go and talk to someone and see if there's anything there. I'm not suggesting that something is wrong with you, but it's more of like, hey, I do notice, and I guess it comes with the awareness that, hey, something's not right. Yeah, and it happens for me. Like I regularly see a therapist and a counselor because, for example, I know that I'm going to have a busy period coming, and I know that things are going to be high pressure. So I want to go offload, get support, and then that fills my bucket for the rest of that time that's coming up. Or, if I've been through something really difficult, then I'll go see the therapist.
Hey, but thank you for sharing that, because to hear from, you, a psychologist, a positive scientist, a happiness scientist, sharing that, hey, even you need that kind of decompression, to offload and all that. I think it makes it a little bit easier. You're removing that stigma for the rest of us to seek help. Yeah, and there's no too small an issue for you to seek help on,
Yes, I think that's the key, because I think sometimes people wait and they say, it must be serious enough for me to go and But very often when it's serious enough, then you need a lot of intervention, which is resource intensive.
Right.
And it's really, I guess it would be more challenging to unpack everything that's accumulated. But if there's something that you're already beginning to notice, then why not go more on the preventative route?
So we can be normalizing therapy if that's...
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's why I want to mention it on air, because to me it's just like going to a doctor, right? When you're not well, you go to a doctor and you get what do you need.
I like that.
And then you come back. Or like if you have injured your ankle, and I always say this in my classes, you injured your ankle, you could be stubborn and say, I'll still walk on it, I don't need crutches. Because you think that crutches is weakness. But then what if you went and you got the crutch and the crutch is taking off the pressure just so that you can recuperate the ankle?
Wow.
And then you come back and then you're stronger. Right? Rather than saying that, no, I don't need it, and then you go walk on it and then it gets worse. So I always use this analogy.
That's a really good analogy. And actually, we have this really great question from Colin Tan on our Facebook. We'll address it here and also on our Facebook Live in just a second. He says, what about stroke patients? Because, you know, a lot of mental stress comes in just that 24 hours. Suddenly you're handicapped, you know, you face paralysis. It's very hard to face all of that. So he feels that is there a great chance that it's, I guess, trauma in its own way? You know, is there a lot of mental health issues that could come out for stroke patients in particular?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert on stroke. I'm saying that I guess with any kind of physical illness that comes in a short amount of time, like an accident or in this case a stroke, the recovery would often be very challenging because it's you're not prepared for it. And you may not have the skill set to deal with it, and your family members would suddenly now be thrown into the role of a caregiver, which means support system may not be 100% as well. So that often means that, you know, during that time it will be a challenging time. I think the most important is to acknowledge that the situation has changed. Many of us can't accept stuff fast enough because we like our comfort zone. We are used to things. We have done things for
New
40,
normal.
50. Yeah, but when things shift, like the pandemic, I think the first few months be like, it's okay, it's going to pass. And then when we get into denial, it's like, no, I can't do this. You know, then you go through this frustration. And I think with something like stroke, when it happens, it's of course going to be distressing, and there's no doubt about it. But to deny that, no, it's distressing, then that's not helpful too.
Wow.
Very good point. We're going to share that again as we head on over to our Facebook Live. Come and join us.
Back with more of Sha-En in just a little while. So enlightening.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us here on our Facebook Live with Sha-En, our happiness scientist, as we celebrate a day before World Mental Health Day tomorrow. And I love this question coming in from Colin Tan, and he asked about, for stroke patients, because it really is in that, 24 hours, your whole life is turned upside down. And we shared a little bit about, what are the kind of, mental stress that they can face and how can they deal with it. And I guess, from what you shared on air, which you will share again in just a bit, it's applicable to any sort of, disease that can really overtake you, your family, taking on that caregiver's role.
Yeah, and we go back to the definition, are you feeling good? Are you functioning well? I mean, if you have gone through a stroke, and of course there are varying degrees, and I'm not an expert on strokes, but if you are not able to suddenly be active like you used to, that's a shift you have to adjust to. You're not able to speak because often they can't speak as well.
Yes.
And then you have to adjust to that as well. And if there's so many changes coming in the span of 24 hours, then you can imagine that's very distressing because it's like you're not you.
It's a lot to deal with.
It's not, it's definitely challenging. So I think one thing is, of course, in a moment, it's really hard to accept that this is happening to me. But I guess it's a process of just walking through it together with your support system and saying, yes, well, this has happened. This is the reality now. It's really difficult. And I'm having all these emotions. I mean, it's important to be able to express it out. Rather than like, no, I wanted things to go back the way that it was. Of course, we all want that. And I can empathize.
It kind of brings me to my next question, actually. Why does a healthy sense of mental well-being come easily for some and not for others? Okay, I mean, yes, when you have like a sudden physical ailment that you have to deal with, like a stroke, of course, that's not going to happen overnight, as we just talked about. But in general, for someone as well, you seem to see other people who can like pick themselves out very easily. And then there are others who really struggle, to choose joy, choose happiness in the moment, day by day. Why is that?
It's a combination of factors, and I'll go back to I guess it's age-old, right? There's a nurture versus nature. So for some people, nature is quite strong. So if in your genetics you have the predisposition towards mental illnesses like anxiety or even schizophrenia, for example, then the chances of you having that is higher, or the onset could be earlier, which means that maybe you'll be struggling with it a longer time, and then of course maybe need more support for recovery.
Sure.
Yeah, and so that's one component. And then of course nurture, what you're exposed to over time. And again, we go back to that definition. It's not that something bad happened to you, but that during that situation you felt helpless to respond, or you felt alone. And so if such experiences happen, and the early childhood window is always a time when we absorb a lot of things, and we
what
are
ages
young.
is that?
Under 7.
Under 7.
And of course, because emotionally we're not
kind of short circuits your system, isn't it?
Yeah,
your
so
operating system.
Yeah, so it's like you learned that to survive, you had to behave in a certain way in order to just get through that or deal with whatever challenge you were.
Yeah.
But then as you grew up, you didn't unlearn it because it was there, and that's how you operate. That's why some of us may be very anxious by nature, because that's how we responded. And that was what kept us alive. And those were protective at the time. We were young. Like for example, for me, sometimes I felt in when I was younger that I was lonely. And so now sometimes I do have this feeling that comes, like I'm so lonely. And so I recognize that, but I kind of say like, hey, that was something that you needed to do, to rather than believe XXX. And we often choose a more protective thought, like I'm alone, versus nobody cares about me, right? It's a bit of a distinction. And then so now when I notice it, I'm like, no, Shan, you're not lonely. People do care for you. I have to unlearn some of my own thinking.
So that's something you do when you catch yourself feeling that way. You have to stop and actually tell yourself that.
Yes,
reframe the narrative.
Yes, exactly. And I'm not saying that it's easy.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's going through all the inner work allows me to be able to be more aware.
So would you suggest, we're trying to remove that stigma, like you said, going to see a therapist is just like going to see a doctor. There's nothing big about it. Everyone just needs that little bit of help here and there, and it's normal. It's normal, right? Yes. So when you mentioned about that when it's before the age of 7, how kids cope with what they're experiencing in life, they could take on trauma that they don't realize they are taking on that can impact them later on in life. Would you suggest that we bring our kids to go and speak to a therapist?
Well, there are kids as young as 10, 11 who need to speak to therapists because probably there's a lot of emotion that has yet to be, they can't connect with it, or they connect with it and they don't know what to do or process it.
Right.
And so if you see your child struggling, I would say that there's really no stigma to bring your child. Of course, they might feel differently, or you might feel differently, like, have I done something wrong for my child to be in this state?
But it's better to address it, do you think? It's better to address it, get help for it?
Yes, I would. Yeah. But of course, I know for parents it's very disconcerting. I work with a lot of parents and they often do not know what to do. Yeah, their first impression is like, so who do I go to? It's so confusing. Is it a counselor? Is it a psychologist? Is it a psychiatrist? Right. First of all, the distinctions between all these can be a bit like, oh no, and then after that,
overwhelming as well.
And then after that, it's like, then who? And actually, a lot of it has got to do with fit. You need to feel comfortable with your therapist or your counselor before you feel safe to open up.
Yeah, because a kid could go to a counselor or a therapist and not feel safe or comfortable with that person, and they don't quite come out experiencing what you want them to.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes because of that, they will walk away thinking, this is not going to help me. Because they did not have that connection. And
then they dismiss therapy as a whole as it being beneficial to them.
But it takes time, to find a good fit, right?
True,
just like
true.
cutting hair. Your first haircut may not always look that great, so you need to go from hairdresser. I'm not trying to belittle the point, but just saying that sometimes you do need a connection and a trust and a foundation with that person who's supposed to help you.
But that's a really
before
good point.
that person feels like, this person does not threaten me. I do not feel defensive in your presence. I'm willing to share.
Yeah. Good point.
It may take time.
It's good that you bring that up because I think a lot of us, we don't know. We don't know because this might be our first time, and especially for our kids. So Who knows? Maybe I go back and ask my kids, want to go and meet someone?
Meet someone.
Meet this therapist.
Meet someone. If only there was a center therapy session. Oh, that would be fantastic.
No, but this whole thing about normalizing it is really opening up my mind. You know what I mean? That they, for whatever reason, whatever they're experiencing, that they can have someone, a professional to talk to and then help guide them, you know, because they are at the age where they are easily, you know, their minds are still being shaped. Yes. Right, and it's going to help them in their future, the future years. You know, so I am opening my mind up to all this. Very good. Very good.
What can some individuals do to work on their mental well-being? Let's say in between waiting for a therapy session, or organizing an appointment.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways, and again, different strokes for different folks. For some people, exercise and movement is really helpful, whether it's dancing, walking, cycling, swimming. I was reading this article recently about this old lady, or senior lady in another country. I think it's France. And unfortunately, she lost all 3 of her children before she passed.
Wow.
Her adult children. And she couldn't cope with her grief. And all she had was a bicycle. Okay. And so she got on her bicycle and started cycling. around France, and it's a huge country.
Yeah.
And she went, and she went up all the really challenging paths, all just with a bicycle and a helmet, and of course her wallet to pay for food. And now she's garnered something like a support from people around who see her as they call her Nanny. I forgot her name.
Nanny on
Mavis,
wheels.
I think. Yeah, Nanny Mavis is coming, and let's support. But then she said, I don't know what else to do, but this is keeping me going because I'm feeling strong inside.
Wow.
So I think, different strokes for different folks, right? And some of us, we like to journal. Some of us, artistic expression. Yeah, but some form of processing does help.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's not talking to someone, there are other ways too.
Yeah.
Just a quick shout out to Colin Tan, who shared the question about, the mental health issues that stroke patients might be suffering from and how to deal with it. He shares that he's actually post-stroke for 5 years. Still feeling a bit of stress, but hang in there, Colin. It's not easy. Yeah.
Thanks, Colin, for chiming in this morning, letting us know you're there. All right, we're just going to head back live on air. We're just going to quickly recap that idea of how that sense of well-being comes easily for some and not for others. If you could just share that again, thanks. Alanis Morissette and You Oughta Know here on 1FM 91.3. You oughta know we got our happiness scientist with us in the studio this morning, Yeo Sha-En. She is Singapore's very first happiness scientist, and in to talk about, mental well-being, because tomorrow is World Mental Health Day, happens every year on 10th of October. And, earlier on we're discussing on Facebook, Sha-En, why the sense of, healthy or well-being comes easily for some and not for others. Yeah.
So, there are 2 parts to it. Some part of it is nature. So, if your family has a predisposition towards some of the mental illnesses, then I guess your chances of experiencing it are higher, or the onset might be earlier. It's not a guarantee. I think we want to assure people. Sometimes people say, "Oh, then if my parent got this, then I'm doomed."
It might not even surface.
It might not even surface, and if you already know about it, then I guess it's more on the nurture side of things. Intentional actions or steps that you can take in order to nourish your well-being.
Okay, so part of it is DNA.
Yes.
Wow.
But yes and no, though. Yes, whether it really gets shown.
But it's not a death sentence.
Someone actually said, it loads the gun, but it doesn't fire it, in that sense.
Yeah. And so, if the conditions around in your environment facilitate it to manifest, then it could be earlier onset, or, and of course for some, it's, even if your environment is very supportive, it could still be an onset. So if the genetic marker is very strong for that, it could. But I think one of the things that we also need to dispel is that people do live with mental illness, and they can flourish too.
Yeah,
good point.
And whether it's a mix of medication with therapy, with purposeful and meaningful things that they are engaged in, people do live with it, and people do recover. For different people, it's a different road and different journey.
Yeah.
But I think something that people may be afraid of is that, oh no, once I get into this state, I'll never get better.
Yeah, because you often hear, like when you look at your friends struggling and you're like, hey, snap out of it. And it's like, trust me, I want to, but you can't, or you're like, why can't this person just, move on? And you look at that person and you're like, what's going on? They just need to snap out of it. We've normalized that kind of conversation, but not knowing what is the backstory. Like what you said earlier, what happened to you, I think is such an important question. Now, this is theme for World Mental Health Day. Is mental health is a human right. How can this be implemented at the workplace, at home, and in schools?
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, mental health was something that became front and center because we're all feeling isolated and disconnected. So, I mean, if we see mental health as a human right for all, then I would say that at the workplace, if you're in a position of leadership, to put mental health as a priority and foundational piece, not as a bonus, and to not put it into one of those tick in the box things like, oh, tomorrow's 10, so we're having a talk. But the rest of the year, we don't talk about it. Because if it's a human right, then it's something that matters every day. Right?
Wow,
as opposed to like, oh, only 10 October, then rest of the year, I will overload you. I will load you with toxic behavior.
There's no such thing.
I don't care about you. But on the 10th, okay, you can have a self-care day. Right? I'm just putting, at the workplace,
but it
I think
can happen. I can see, I can see how that happens. So it's really an overhaul of the corporate culture as well, and to really have proper year-long daily, steps in place.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if you're a leader, I say this very often because the research shows that the satisfaction at work that people experience largely comes from the most immediate supervisor. So if you're having a really terrible relationship with your immediate supervisor, and of course if that's coupled with a very toxic environment, then your mental health is definitely going to be compromised. You're not going to be feeling good, and you may be functioning, but you're not functioning well. So again, we go back to those 2 pointers, right? Feeling good, functioning well. So at the workplace, there's lots to be done.
Fantastic. And to sum up, can you just share with us 3 tips for everyone to, improve the sense of mental well-being?
It's okay to seek help. I think that's something that we can normalize and say that, let's not wait till the symptoms become so overwhelming that it becomes even an effort to get out of your house. And I've seen that happen, and it's really tough to be on the supportive caregiving side. Number 2, it's daily action over time can build up accumulatively to be something really good for your well-being, whether that is taking a walk, talking to someone. Some people have pets. Pet therapy, right? People do recover and have not unconditional love and support. So what is it that is for you? And everyone's is different. Find that one thing and do it every day. Just something small every day. And that accumulates over time. Yeah.
I can see, everyone being able to incorporate, like you said, one small thing every day. I love that.
Yeah. Because then it becomes accessible, right?
Eat chocolate. Dark chocolate.
And the third thing, get lots of hugs.
Love and support is very important.
Relationships is important, So I think sometimes we may take the, relationships in our life for granted, right? And so maybe whether it's spending time, maybe it's a hug, maybe it's holding hands, maybe it's sharing a chocolate cake for Lavinia.
I just want to hug my kids right now and my husband.
Yeah. I mean, it's the small things. Again, I think if we nurture our relationships, then that gives us a lot of mental well-being, lots of resilience.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sha-En, for being here with us today and sharing with us some true nuggets on, mental well-being and mental wellness. Thank you so much. And of course, keep doing the fabulous work that you do. You definitely help us all, not just spread joy, but also find balance in life. Thanks, Sha-En. Rewatch this interview on Facebook at facebook.com/1FM91.3.
Good times. Greatest hits.